I had attended the Moon Festival for 11 years as Alpha King of Varnholt, and in all 11 of those years, the ride home had been quiet. That was the point of it. 3 hours on the Harvest Road, the lanterns of the festival growing small behind us, the dark fields sliding past, and nothing expected of me. No petitions, no counsel, no one requiring the particular expression I wore in public, composed, unhurried, the face of a king who had everything in hand. For 3 hours I could simply be a man sitting in a carriage in the dark, and that was worth more to me than any ceremony we'd put on that night. I climbed in at half past the 10th bell, pulled the curtain closed, and heard someone already in the carriage eating. I stopped. There was definitely someone eating. The sound was very clear, the specific, unhurried sound of a person working through a piece of bread, and it was coming from the far corner of my carriage, which was supposed to contain only me, my travel provisions, and the particular silence I had been looking forward to for 6 hours. I pulled the curtain back further. A young woman sat in the corner seat with her knees angled toward the wall and a piece of my bread in her hand. She was dark-haired, practically dressed in a harvest-gray wool cloak, and she had the posture of someone who had been entirely comfortable until approximately 1 second ago, when she looked up and saw me. She did not scream, she did not drop the bread. She looked at me for a long moment with dark, steady eyes, and then she said, "This isn't the Orville Village carriage." "No," I said, "it is not." "They're both black," she said, with the tone of someone who found this architecturally irresponsible. "With gold fittings, who does that?" "The Crown," I said. She looked at the bread in her hand. She looked at the interior of the carriage, the deep padded seats, the lacquered walls, the small traveling cabinet that had, until a moment ago, been closed and locked. She looked at me. "You're the Alpha King," she said. "Yes. I've eaten your bread." "I can see that." A pause. Outside, the festival grounds were still busy, distant voices, the flicker of lanterns through the curtain gap. My guard would be doing a final perimeter sweep before we departed. We had perhaps 4 minutes. "I should get out," she said. "The door locks from the outside once the guard seals it for travel. They'll have sealed it when I got in." I tested the handle. It gave the small, definitive resistance of a locked mechanism. "Yes." She looked at the door. She looked at me. Something moved across her face, not panic, not the elaborate horror most people produced when they found themselves in an unexpected situation involving the Alpha King of Varnholt. It was more the expression of someone doing quick, practical arithmetic. "So I am locked in your carriage," she said. "For approximately 3 hours," I said. "Yes." Another pause, then she held out the bread. "Do you want some of this back?" I sat down across from her. I should explain, and I am explaining this in retrospect, because at the time I was not explaining anything to myself. I was simply reacting to a situation with the composure I maintained in all situations, which is to say I sat down, and I accepted half of my own bread from a stranger in my carriage and I ate it. This seemed reasonable. We were going to be locked in together for 3 hours and there was no help for it, and the bread was good bread. What I did not account for, in that first minute, was my wolf. My wolf had been quiet for years. Not absent. I could always feel him, the specific weight of that other consciousness running alongside mine, the one who understood territory and pack, and the deep animal grammar of the world in ways I sometimes had to translate upward into court language. He was there. He just hadn't been particularly interested in anything for a long time. The last woman my counsel had presented as a potential mate 3 years ago, he had regarded with the same mild attention he gave to well-made furniture. Present, functional, nothing more. Now he was sitting up. I became aware of this in the way you become aware of a fire that's been banked all winter, suddenly putting out actual heat. Not a dramatic surge, just a warmth that had not been there a moment before, and a directional quality to it. A sense of that there. I filed this away and said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say. Willa, she said. She had apparently decided that if we were going to be locked in a carriage together for 3 hours, introductions were reasonable. Candlemaker's daughter, from the Orville settlement on the Varnholt border. Kaylin, I said. I know who you are. I know you do. I thought it was polite to say. She considered this. Fair enough. She looked at the travel lantern mounted above the cabinet, a good lantern, solid brass, the candle well seated. She frowned at it. What? I said. The wick's trimmed wrong, she said. It's going to start pulling to one side in about 20 minutes, and then you'll have uneven light for the rest of the trip. I looked at the lantern. It looked fine to me. I make candles, she said, answering the question I hadn't asked. I know wicks. You're welcome to fix it. I would need to reach it. I stood, took the lantern off its mount, and handed it to her. She took it with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who handled fire regularly, produced a small folding tool from somewhere inside her cloak, and set about adjusting the wick with the focused competence of a person doing something they had done many times before. Her hands were practiced, steady. She worked without looking up. My wolf was now paying very close attention. Stop it, I told him silently. He did not stop it. The carriage had been rolling for perhaps 40 minutes when she asked me, with genuine curiosity rather than social maneuvering, what the Moon Festival was actually for. What do you mean? I said. I mean, what is it for? Every year, same night, the Alpha King comes out to the harvest grounds with half his court, and there are lanterns and 3 different kinds of ceremonial food that nobody really wants to eat, and the blessing of the season, and then everyone goes home. But what's the— she made a small gesture, looking for the word. The point. Is it political? Is it religious? Is it just tradition, and nobody remembers why anymore? I opened my mouth to give her the official answer, which I had given many times in many forms. The Moon Festival honored the first harvest compact between the Varnholt packs, sealing the bond between the settled and the wandering lines, a ceremony of unity and— You made a face, she said. I did not make a face. You started to make a face and then stopped. That means the real answer is different from the one you were about to give. I looked at her. She was watching me with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere else to be and no particular stake in being agreeable. It began as a genuine compact ceremony, I said, 8 generations ago. At this point it is tradition, which means it is primarily the performance of continuity. So nobody remembers why. The historians remember. Everyone else shows up because their parents showed up. She nodded, apparently satisfied to have the accurate version. Same as the Orville harvest lighting. We light candles in the western field every autumn because someone did it once when the wolves were circling the settlement boundary and it kept them back, and now we do it every year. The wolves haven't circled the settlement in 60 years. We still do it. Does it feel pointless? She thought about this, actually thought, not performed the thinking. No. It feels like everyone who did it before is still in the room. That's not nothing. I did not have an answer for that immediately. I had thought something similar, on occasion. Standing in the middle of a ceremony I was executing with full attention while privately aware that its original meaning was layers down under the accumulated weight of repetition. But I had not heard it put that way. No, I said, it isn't nothing. My wolf made a very specific internal movement that I had no good language for. It was not the restless surge of interest. It was quieter than that, more like settling, the particular shift of a creature recognizing that the ground it's standing on is actually the right ground. I was aware that this was significant. I was also aware that I was in a carriage with a stranger who had eaten my bread by accident, and that performing any kind of significance would be both premature and strange. So I said, what does candle smoke smell like when you're used to it? And she said without hesitation, You stop smelling it eventually. It's just air. And we talked for another hour about things that had nothing to do with festivals or kingdoms. She fell asleep at the 2-hour mark. Not gradually. One moment she was in the middle of saying something about the difference between beeswax and tallow, and then her head had angled back against the padded seat, and she was simply gone. Her hands, loose in her lap, had the particular relaxation of someone who had been on their feet since before dawn. My wolf sat with this for a very long time. I had been king for 11 years, and I had attended exactly this many moon festivals, and I had ridden this road in this carriage more times than I could count, and in all of those rides the carriage had contained the specific quality of silence that belonged to a single person alone. Now it had a different quality, not the silence of absence, the other kind, the silence of sufficient presence, the quiet that settles when the room has the right number of people in it. I had been in enough wrong-sized rooms to know the difference. I looked at the lantern. She had fixed the wick, and the light was steady and even, and had been for the past 2 hours without pulling once to the side. My wolf made the settling movement again, deeper this time. I leaned my head back against my own seat and looked at the ceiling of the carriage and thought, with the methodical calm I brought to all problems, this is a complication. Not because of who she was. I had been told since I was 20 that the bond, when it came, would not negotiate. My father had told me. His father had told him. The mate bond in our bloodline was old and particular, and it fixed on what it fixed on, and it did not care about the convenience of the timing. But the timing was, she was asleep in my carriage because she got into the wrong one. That was the whole story. In 2 hours we would arrive at Varnholt, and she would get out and presumably find some way back to the Orville border settlement, and that would be the logical end of it. My wolf, informed of this plan, declined to engage with it. She's not your anything yet, I told him. She doesn't know you exist. We are not going to act on an hour of conversation and a well-trimmed wick. He turned his back on this reasoning in the particular way he had, not dismissal, just the patient certainty of a creature who already knew the outcome and was simply waiting for me to catch up. I sat with this for the remaining 40 minutes of the journey. She woke when the carriage slowed at the outer gate, the change in the road surface, the guard's call, the small jolt of the wheels finding cobblestones. She was oriented instantly, without the confusion most people showed on waking in an unfamiliar place. Her eyes opened, she registered the carriage, the lantern me, and said, "We're at Varnholt." "Yes." "Middle of the night." "Just past 1 bell." She looked at the window. "There's no way back to Orville tonight." "No." She was quiet for a moment, processing this with the same practical arithmetic I'd seen on her face at the beginning. Not distress, just calculation. Then, "Is there an inn in the outer town?" "Several, but—" I paused, because what I was about to say required some care with the phrasing. "The hour means the outer gate taverns will be the kind where the rooms have uncertain cleanliness, and the guests are all still awake for reasons that won't be restful. The hall has guest rooms." She looked at me. "I'm offering you a room," I said, "not anything else. The hall has 18 guest rooms, and at present only 2 are occupied. I'm not—" I stopped, because I had been about to say I'm not making any claim on you, which was accurate but had an odd quality given that my wolf was, in fact, making every possible claim on her without her knowledge. It's a practical solution for one night. "That's a very careful sentence," she said. "I'm a careful person." Another look. Then she said, "All right, 1 night, and you'll tell your people I'm a guest, not whatever the other categories are." "Guest is the only category that applies," I said, and meant it. She nodded once, apparently satisfied, and when the carriage door was unsealed by my guard and swung open, she climbed out ahead of me with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had never been in a king's carriage before and was handling it by simply pretending it was a carriage. I followed her out, and my wolf was so bright with certainty that I could feel it in my hands. The hall at this hour was all banked fires and the particular hush of a large stone building settling into cold. The night steward, Fenwick, met us at the inner door and took my carriage travel coat without blinking at the situation, which was one of Fenwick's many virtues. "The east guest room on the second corridor," I told him. "Have someone take wood up and light the hearth. And water if there's any still hot." "Of course, my lord." He glanced at Willa once, professional and quick, and asked her if there was anything she needed. She looked slightly startled to be asked. "No, thank you." Fenwick produced a candle from somewhere. He always had candles, and offered it to her. She took it, looked at it, and said, "The wick's been trimmed by someone who learned in a hurry." Fenwick regarded the candle. "It does tend to gutter in the upper corridor, my lord." "I'll fix it before I go up," she said. This was apparently not an offer so much as a statement of intent. She produced her small folding tool again and adjusted the wick in approximately 40 seconds and handed the candle back. Fenwick examined it. Something in his expression shifted, the very faint recalibration of someone who has just moved a person from one category to another without being entirely sure which new category applies. "Thank you, miss." "Willa," she said, "not miss." "Willa," he said, and showed her upstairs. I watched them go. My wolf was so settled it was almost loud, the internal equivalent of a large creature sitting down heavily in the right place and exhaling. I went to my study and stared at the unlit fireplace for a while. The situation was this. The mate bond when it arrived was not a suggestion. I knew this from everything I'd been told, and from the deep animal grammar of the thing itself, which was currently making itself very clear in the architecture of my chest. She was the one. My wolf had chosen. In the old understanding, that was everything. She did not know any of this. She thought she had gotten into the wrong carriage, been taken home by a king who was being polite, and been given a room for the night. Tomorrow she would presumably find a way to Orville and go back to her candles and her border settlement, and her dry-witted accurate assessments of ceremonies nobody could explain anymore. My wolf found this scenario unacceptable. "She doesn't know you," I told him. "Then let her," he said, which was unusual. My wolf was not generally verbose. He was making an exception. I sat in my study for another hour, and then I went to bed. And I slept badly, and in the morning I sent word that breakfast would be laid in the small dining room if the guest in the east second corridor wished to join me, and that there was no obligation. She came. She arrived at the small dining room at the 7th bell in the same practical wool cloak, her dark hair managed but not formal, and ate breakfast with the specific quality of someone who had decided that as long as she was here she might as well be here. She did not perform gratitude. She did not perform anything. She drank the morning tea, considered the bread, and said, "This is better bread than the festival bread." "The festival bread is made for 150 people," I said. "It sacrifices quality for volume. The Orville harvest bread feeds about 30, and it's still not this good." She turned a piece of it in her hands. "What flour?" "I don't know." She seemed to find this mildly unacceptable, in the way she found a badly trimmed wick unacceptable, not outraged, just noting a gap. "You live here and you don't know what flour your kitchen uses." "I govern a realm," I said. "I leave the flour to people who care about flour." "You should care about flour. It's the kind of thing that—" She stopped. "Sorry, not my business." "No, go on." She set the bread down. "The things a household actually runs on: candles, flour, firewood, salt. When those are right, everything else sits on a better foundation. When they're wrong, there's this low, constant friction that nobody names because it seems too small to mention, but it's always there." She paused. "I think about this in terms of candlelight. A room with bad light feels wrong and people don't know why. A room with good light feels habitable, like somewhere you can actually think. I had been king for 11 years. I had received reports on grain reserves and fuel stores and trade balances, and I had processed them as logistics, and I had never once thought about what the texture of those things felt like from the inside of them. "You're right," I said. She blinked. She had, I realized, expected mild contradiction, or at least the polite deflection of a man who had more important things to care about than flour. "You're just agreeing," she said. "It's what I do when someone is correct." She looked at me for a moment, the direct, steady look I'd already come to recognize. Not calculating, just looking the way a person looks when they're deciding what something actually is. Then she went back to the bread. My wolf was so warm I could feel it in my face. We had been talking for the better part of an hour when my seneschal, Aldwin, appeared at the doorway with the expression of a man who has a great deal to say and is choosing the correct moment to begin. He had served my family for 30 years and could communicate entire geopolitical situations with a single eyebrow. The eyebrow said, "There is something happening here that I was not briefed on, and I require information at the earliest convenience." I said, "Aldwin, this is Willa from the Orville settlement. She was misdirected into the wrong carriage at the festival last night. She'll be with us today. Arrangements are being made for her return to Orville." Aldwin absorbed this. His eyebrow said, "Only today." I said with deliberate evenness, "She'll tell me if she'd like to stay longer." Willa, who had been watching this exchange with the calm of someone watching an interesting foreign language being spoken, said, "I do need to get back. I have orders." "Candle orders," I said. 12 dozen by the next market day." She counted something in her head. "It's possible. If I leave by mid-afternoon." "Then you'll have this morning." She looked at me. That same considering look, except slightly different this time, less "what are you" and more "why are you?" "You don't have to entertain me." "I'm not entertaining you. I was going to walk the east wall this morning to look at the repair on the watchtower. You're welcome to come or not." She came. The east wall repair was a genuine concern. A section of the inner parapet had been weakened by the autumn rains, and the Masons' Guild had submitted 3 competing assessments of the damage that disagreed with each other in ways that made no structural sense. I walked the repair site and examined what the Masons had done, and reached the same conclusion I had reached on the written report, which was that 2 of the 3 assessments were wrong. Willa walked alongside me, said nothing about the parapet, and looked at the watchtower. "The window facing east," she said. I looked at the window she meant, a narrow archer's opening that had been widened at some point, probably 2 rains ago. "What about it?" "The frame. The wood's damp on the lower left corner. If it's not sealed before real winter, the moisture gets in and by spring you'll have rot in the wall below it." She glanced at me. I notice this with window frames because the airflow around a window affects the candle inside. Damp frames draw in cold air from the edges and you get flicker. Once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. I looked at the window. She was right. The lower left corner showed the specific dark staining of wood that had been taking in moisture for a while. "I'll have Aldwin note it," I said. "He was already doing that," she said. I looked back to find Aldwin, who had followed us at a respectful distance, writing in his record book with the expression of a man who was filing away both the structural note and approximately everything else about the morning. We walked the rest of the wall in a comfortable silence that felt, somehow, like the conclusion of a much longer conversation. My wolf was moving through it all with the steady warmth of something that has been cold for a long time and remembers, with great relief, what warmth feels like. I was aware at some level that I was about to lose this. Mid-afternoon she would get in a different carriage, the right one this time, and go back to Orville, and the hall would have the wrong-sized silence again, and my wolf would have extremely strong opinions about this, which I would have to manage. The difficulty was that I could not simply tell her. The mate bond it was real, it was true, it was the most certain thing in my life, and it was also something a woman who had got in the wrong carriage by accident was under no obligation to receive gracefully. I had known her for less than a day. From her perspective, I was a king who had been decent to her in an inconvenient situation. From my wolf's perspective, she was everything. These two facts did not yet have a bridge between them. I was still thinking about this when we came back inside, and Aldwin brought me a border dispatch that needed immediate attention, and Willa said, entirely reasonably, that she would go check on the arrangements for her afternoon carriage and leave me to work. "I'll find you before you leave," I said. She raised an eyebrow. My father would have appreciated that eyebrow. He'd always said that an eyebrow could say more than a paragraph, and went. The next 3 hours were the council, and the dispatch, and 2 conversations about the grain stores that I paid more attention to than usual because I was thinking about flour and friction. And then Aldwin appeared again to tell me the Orville carriage would be ready at the 4th afternoon bell, which was 40 minutes away. I found her in the hall's small library, not because she had been looking for a library, she told me, but because she had been looking for somewhere quiet, and this was the room with the best light. She was sitting near the south window with a book that had nothing to do with candles, reading with the absorbed ease of someone who had simply needed 20 minutes of quiet and had taken them. She looked up when I came in. "You have a very good library for a working hall." My grandmother's collection. She valued books over almost everything else. "She sounds sensible." She was the most sensible person I've ever known. I sat down across from her. "The carriage will be ready at the 4th bell." "Good." She closed the book and held it for a moment. "I should say thank you for handling the whole thing with more grace than I'd have expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, more fuss, more formality." She set the book on the side table. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She thought about it. Someone who lives inside the ceremony, who is, she looked for the word, encased in it, like a candle inside a glass lantern. Still burning but cut off. I felt this land somewhere specific, the way accurate things did. And you're not. There's a version of you that's the ceremony, and then she stopped. "I'm describing my impression of someone I've known for less than a day. This is overstepping. You trimmed the wick last night and the light was better for it. Keep going." A small, unexpected laugh, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her, the kind that surprises the person having it. My wolf moved like a banner catching wind. "All right," she said. "There's the Alpha King of Varnholt, and then there's the person who ate bread with me and talked about flour and walked an actual wall to look at actual stone and agreed with me when I was right without needing to qualify it. Those feel like different people from the outside. I don't know if they're different people to you." They weren't, but the question of whether they had been, for a long time, something nobody had thought to ask. "No," I said, "they're not different." "Then why does the second one only come out in a carriage in the dark at midnight?" I had no good answer for this. It was the right question. The kind that arrives in a form so direct it doesn't leave room for the usual armoring. "I don't know," I said, which was the honest answer. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her cloak from the chair beside her and said, "You should let him out more." I walked her to the outer court, where the carriage was being prepared. The afternoon was cold and clear, the kind of autumn light that made everything look specific and near. Aldwin was overseeing the carriage with the faint air of a man managing a situation he has not yet fully categorized. We stood in the outer court and I said, "I'd like," and stopped, because the sentence had several possible endings and I needed to choose the right one. Not "I'd like you to stay," which was too much. Not "I'd like to see you again," which was also, delivered at this moment, too much in the other direction. "The market day," she said. 12 dozen by the next market day. That's 10 days from now." Yes. After that the orders slowed down until midwinter. She adjusted her cloak. Orville is 3 hours from Varnholt. Less on the main road at a decent pace, I said. She looked at the carriage, then at me, with the direct look that by now I recognized as simply how she looked at things she was taking seriously. I'm not good at formal visits. If you came to the settlement, I'd probably just put you to work somewhere. I have no objection to work. Something in her expression shifted, a small, careful warmth that didn't quite commit to itself yet. All right, she said, after market day. She got into the carriage, the right one this time, and it pulled out through the gate, and I watched it go until the road turned and the dust settled. And my wolf was the specific, patient certainty of something that knows it's found what it was looking for, and is prepared to wait as long as required. I went to Orville 11 days later. Aldwyn came with me, because Aldwyn came everywhere, and also because he had been providing me with increasingly pointed administrative justifications for visits to the border settlements, each one more creative than the last, and I had put an end to this by telling him simply that I was going to Orville and he could either come or not. He came. The Orville settlement was smaller than I'd pictured, perhaps 40 households, a market square with a winter market just concluding, the smell of wood smoke and cold air, and something that might have been beeswax. We came in on the main road, and the settlement's headman met us at the turning, an old man named Croft who had clearly been briefed by someone that an Alpha King might be arriving, because he had the expression of a person executing a situation with much more calm than they actually felt. "My lord," he said, "we're honored." "Thank you for having us," I said. "I'm looking for the candlemaker." Croft directed us to a building near the western end of the settlement, a solid, practical structure with a workshop attached, candle smoke drifting from a vent in the roof. I left the horses with my guard and went to the workshop door and knocked. "Not open," said a voice from inside. "Orders are picked up at the front." "I'm not here for an order," I said. A pause, then footsteps. The door opened and Willa stood there in a work apron, with wax on her hands and a very mild expression that nonetheless managed to convey, "I see. So that actually happened." "You found it," she said. "You said 3 hours on the main road." I said 3 hours. I didn't say come. But she stepped back from the door to let me in, which was the same thing. The workshop was exactly what it should have been, organized, warm, smelling of beeswax and rendered tallow, and the particular clean char of properly trimmed wicks. Every surface was in use. Rows of candles in various stages of completion hung from ceiling racks. Molds lined the lower shelves. Her work table held 3 different orders in progress. Everything had a place and everything was in it. I looked around, and my wolf was so warm he was practically audible. "You finished the 12 dozen, I said. "Yesterday." She was wiping her hands on a cloth, watching me take in the workshop. "Did you actually come here to check on my order status?" "No." "Then why did you come?" I looked at her. The honest answer was that my wolf had given me no useful options, and I had spent 11 days thinking about flour and friction, and a woman who had told me to let the real version of myself out more, and none of this added up to a compelling official reason for a state visit to a border settlement, which was why I hadn't constructed one. "Because I wanted to," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. The calculating look, but not the same kind as before. Less "what are you" and more "what are we doing?" "I told you I'd put you to work," she said. "You did." She handed me the cloth. "There are 3 molds on the second shelf that need to be reset before the next pour. Do you know how to reset a candle mold?" "No." "Good, I'll show you." She showed me. It was exacting work. The wicking had to be centered exactly or the finished candle would burn unevenly, and the mold had to be sealed at the base without air pockets, and Willa's method was methodical and precise, and she explained it once clearly, without condescension, and then watched to see if I'd understood. When I did it right, she didn't say well done in the way people said it to kings, as if the bar were very low. She just said, the next one, and moved on. My wolf was so present it was almost embarrassing. We worked through the afternoon. Aldwin, who had come into the workshop after a discreet interval, had apparently found the headman Croft and was having what sounded like a very comprehensive conversation about border road maintenance, which I trusted him to handle. Around the third bell, Willa put a kettle on a small stove in the corner of the workshop and made tea with the economy of someone who had made tea in a workshop 1,000 times, and handed me a cup. "You're actually useful," she said. It was not effusive praise, it was accurate. "Thank you." Most people who come into the workshop are either, she considered, deferential, which means they're afraid to do anything wrong, or confident, which means they do everything wrong and don't notice. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. "You just did the thing." I had good instruction. She looked at her tea. Something had shifted slightly in the afternoon's quality, a change in atmosphere, the way a fire settling into its later stage changed a room. The warmth was still there, but it had gone quieter, more specific. "Why did you actually come?" she said. "Not the version of the answer you gave before." I set my cup down. "I've known since the carriage that my wolf chose you. The bond in my family, it's old, and when it fixes on someone, it doesn't negotiate. I couldn't tell you that night because we'd known each other for 3 hours and it would have been," I paused. "It would have been too much to land on a person who got in the wrong carriage." She was very still. "I came," I said, "because I didn't want to carry this on my side alone, and because you told me to let the real version of myself out more, and the real version of myself is here, telling you this." The workshop was quiet except for the stove and the distant sound of Aldwin's comprehensive conversation. "The mate bond," she said slowly. "Your wolf chose me." "Yes. In the carriage. When you fixed the wick." Something passed across her face, not discomfort, not the particular alarm I'd half expected. More like the expression of someone who has been aware for 11 days that something was happening and has been waiting, somewhat impatiently, to find out what exactly it was. "I didn't know what that was," she said. "The first morning at breakfast, there was something I thought it was just," she stopped. "I thought it was just you being more real than I expected." "It was probably both," I said. She looked at her hands. The wax had dried in the creases of her knuckles. "I'm a candlemaker from a border settlement." "I know. That's not, I mean, in the court's terms, that's." "I'm aware of what the court's terms are," I said. "I'm not asking on behalf of the court." Another long silence. She looked at the rows of candles. She looked at her workshop, her organized, warm, functional workshop, which was exactly the kind of thing she cared about, and was exactly the kind of thing I'd spent 11 years not knowing to care about. "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course. I'm not saying no." She looked at me very directly. "I'm saying I need to actually think about it, not perform thinking about it while already having decided. I need a few days." "Take them." She nodded once. Then she picked up both cups, rinsed them at the basin with the efficiency of someone ending a work session, and said, "There's a reasonable inn at the market square. Croft's nephew runs it. The rooms are clean and the stew is better than you'd expect." "I'll find it." "And the wick in the common room gutters to the left around the 8th bell," she said. "You can fix it or not. I usually do." I left the workshop, and Aldwin fell into step beside me with the expression of someone who had conducted a thorough audit of the border road situation, and was also fully aware that this had not actually been the point of the trip. "Well," he said. "She needs a few days," I said. Aldwin, who had served 2 Alpha Kings and knew what the mate bond looked like in the early stages, said only, "Of course, my lord," and followed me to the inn, where I fixed the wick in the common room at exactly the 8th bell. The few days were 4. On the morning of the 4th day, a rider came to Varnholt from the Orville settlement with a note. It was brief, in a handwriting that went straight across the page without any of the decorative slant people used when writing to royalty. The main road takes 2 hours at a decent pace. I confirmed this myself. W. That was the whole note. I read it twice. My wolf was so incandescent I had to stand still for a moment to let it settle. Then I told Aldwyn to arrange the carriage and went to change out of my working clothes. And Aldwyn, who had been holding the note for a moment with the expression of a man deeply satisfied by a well-executed sentence, handed it back without comment. We established a rhythm. She came to Varnholt when she had orders to fill in the city. I went to Orville when I had border dispatches to review in person, which was not infrequently. The court noticed, with the specific, calculated interest of people who are paid to notice things, and Aldwyn fielded approximately 100 questions about it with the pleasant opacity of a man who had decided what he thought and was not going to share it. The council had a meeting at which I was not present, but which I was later told had covered the topic of what this means for the formal matter of the Alpha King's mate at some length, and had concluded, correctly, that I was already in the process of handling it. What the court did not see, because it happened in a workshop and on a road and in the small dining room at Varnholt where we had eaten breakfast on the second morning, that she had learned I kept track of things obsessively, and that she had started leaving notes about structural observations around the hall because she knew I'd find them and use them. That I had learned that her biggest fear, practically speaking, was running out of beeswax, and that I'd established a reliable supply line from the eastern settlement without telling her about it, and that when she'd found out, she'd called me ridiculous in a tone that was entirely warm. That the mate bond, which had announced itself in a carriage and a workshop and a cup of tea and a correctly trimmed wick, had been settling and deepening, and becoming the architecture of both our lives in the quiet way that real things do, not dramatically, but with the particular solidity of something that has found the right foundation. She came to Varnholt on the first cold morning of winter, when the frost was on the outer gate stones and the hall was lit early. She came with a basket of candles, not an order, just the one she made when she was working through something in her head, which was how she thought, the way I wrote dispatches or walked walls. She set them on the table in the small dining room and sat down and said, "All right." I put down the report I'd been reading. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it would mean, the formal part. Not the," she made a small gesture that indicated everything that had already been happening. "This. I know what this is. I've known for a while. I mean the court part, the ceremony part." "You can tell me what you want it to look like," I said, "or not look like." "Small," she said immediately. I'm not interested in being processed in front of 200 people as a symbolic event." "All right. And I would need to keep the workshop. I can do both. I've thought about this." "I know you can. The Orville settlement will need a reliable candle supply if I'm mostly in Varnholt. I've been working out a model where I train 2 of the apprentices in the settlement and supply them with materials." "Willa," I said. She stopped. "You've planned the supply chain," I said. "You've solved the workshop problem. You've thought about the ceremony. What I'm asking is, are you saying yes?" She looked at me with the direct, steady look that I had come to understand meant she was taking something completely seriously. Then she said, "Yes, I'm saying yes." A pause. "Obviously." The obviously was very her. My wolf exhaled, the long, full exhale of something that had been holding its breath for a while, and has finally, fully, been able to stop. It was small as she'd asked. The hall's great ceremony room, which held 200, was not used. We used the West Library, which had been my grandmother's and which had, Willa pointed out on the morning of it, the best light in the building. The witnesses were Aldwyn, who had the expression of a man watching the logical conclusion of something he had understood before anyone else, and the headman Croft from Orville, who had traveled the 3-hour road and arrived with a warmth that suggested he had thought well of this outcome for some time. The council's senior member was there, and 2 pack elders, because some representation was required, and they had the slightly stunned quality of people who had been managing their expectations for months, and were now discovering that the reality of her was more than their expectations had managed. She wore deep gray, which was her color, with her dark hair simply done. She had a candle in her hand, not ceremonially. It wasn't a ceremony candle. She'd brought it because the sconce near the library door had been giving her trouble, and she'd fixed it before we started. Aldwin had actually seen her fix it and had decided, he told me later, that this was the correct wife for the Alpha King of Varnholt. When the binding words were said, my wolf went so still and bright it was like standing in clear water. Not the excited, searching warmth of the early months, something older and deeper. The certainty that comes when the thing you've been oriented toward finally resolves into its complete form. She looked at me when it was done, after the formal words, the pack elder's acknowledgement, the senior counselor's somewhat overwhelmed nod, with the direct, warm, entirely practical look that was simply how she looked at things she had decided about, and said, quietly, "Your candle in the study is going to gutter by midwinter if you don't have the wick replaced." "I'll put it on the list," I said. "I'll do it," she said. "It's faster." Croft laughed. Aldwin did not laugh, but his expression performed the function. There is a story I have told myself in the months since about how the mate bond works, not as a force that overrides everything, not as a command, but as the thing that makes you stop in the middle of a life you thought was sufficiently organized and realize that you had been, in some essential way, oriented in the wrong direction. Not badly, not wrongly, just off. And then something corrects you, quietly and completely, and afterward you look back at the before time with the particular clarity of a man who has been living in guttering light, and did not know it until someone fixed the wick. My wolf chose her because she fixed the wick. I don't think that's an accident. The court has adapted, the council, which had spent 11 years presenting me with suitable candidates from suitable families, has adapted with the pragmatic grace of people who can read a foundation well, and Willa's observations about the hall, which are frequent, specific, and nearly always correct, have been noted in Aldwin's record book so regularly that he has begun a separate ledger. She runs the candle making at Orville through the 2 apprentices she trained, and supplies the hall, and still makes the candles that appear on our table, which are the best candles I have ever had, which is, obviously, not an accident either. Last week she told me the flour in the kitchen stores is wrong, and she knows a mill in the eastern border settlement that would correct this. I told Aldwin. Aldwin wrote it down. The friction I expect will be gone by spring. She was right. It's the kind of thing a household runs on. And she has been running hours, with the same steady, practical, unhurried competence she brought to a badly trimmed wick in a carriage at midnight. Quietly, from the foundation up, making everything habitable. Making it light.